Okay, so are you ready to dive in? Today, we're taking on a case that never seems to go away, the Zodiac Killer.
Yeah, you're right. It's been over 50 years and people are still totally absorbed by every little detail, every possible clue.
And you know what? Most people know the basics. Northern California, the late 60s and early 70s, those attacks on young couples. But today, we're going deeper.
Yeah, we're going to get into WHY this case. Out of all the unsolved mysteries out there, still has such a hold on us.
Exactly. By the end of this deep dive, you'll understand not just what happened, but why it stuck with us for so long.
It all began with these two attacks, so
Yeah.
brutal, so seemingly random. They really set the stage for everything that came after.
Okay, so picture this. December 1968, a quiet road in Vallejo, two teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, just 16 and 17, out on a date.
And a man walks up to their parked car, orders them out, and then just like that, shoots them.
Betty Lou was shot 5 times, David 3.
It's hard to even imagine that kind of violence, especially against kids that young.
Then, 7 months later, July 4th, 1969, Zodiac strikes again.
This time it's at Blue Rock Springs Park, also in Vallejo. Another young couple, Darlene Farron and Michael McGough, are attacked.
Darlene tragically doesn't make it, but Michael does, and he's actually able to describe the attacker.
But here's the thing that always gets me. Up until this point, there was no Zodiac killer.
Right. These were awful, obviously, but they seemed like separate attacks.
It's not until August of '69 that this whole persona kind of explodes onto the scene.
And how?
He sends letters to 3 Bay Area newspapers claiming he's responsible for both attacks.
Not just claiming, he's bragging about it.
Exactly. And I can only imagine what it must have been like to open up the newspaper and see that.
But it wasn't just the letters, right? He included something else that took this mystery to a whole other level.
Oh, absolutely. The Zodiac ciphers. For those who aren't familiar, a cipher is basically a coded message designed to hide information.
And the Zodiac sent several, basically challenging everyone, the public, the police, to try and decipher them.
And one in particular became super famous, the 408 symbol cryptogram, published on July 31st, 1969.
Talk about a challenge.
But here's the thing. It actually was cracked.
Really?
Yeah. A school teacher and his wife, working tirelessly, figured it out.
Wow. You'd think it would be some big reveal, his identity, his motive.
Yeah, but instead it said, I like killing people because it is so much fun.
Hmm.
And it goes on from there.
Are you kidding? To go through all that trouble just to essentially brag about liking to kill people? What kind of person does that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's this mix of arrogance and this, chilling detachment that makes him so fascinating.
He's not just a killer, he's playing mind games with everyone.
He really is.
And speaking of mind games, let's talk about that symbol, the one that's become almost synonymous with the case. Even people who don't know the details probably recognize that circle with a cross through it.
Yeah, it's like he created a brand,
Yeah.
and he knew what he was doing.
Putting it on letters, at crime scenes, even carved into a victim's car door.
It's not just a signature, it's a statement.
It makes you wonder if that was part of the appeal for him, building this larger-than-life persona.
It's like he wanted to be a celebrity criminal, someone everyone would talk about.
Yeah, someone everyone would fear.
Exactly. And it points to a need for attention that goes way beyond your average criminal.
He wasn't happy with just the crimes themselves. He needed the notoriety, the fear, the attention.
You needed to be known.
And unfortunately, things were about to get even worse. On September 27th, 1969, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard are attacked near Lake Berryessa. And this one felt different, more planned.
It was. This time he approaches them while they're just relaxing, ties them up, and stabs them repeatedly.
Cecilia sadly doesn't survive.
Brian does, though, and he's able to describe the horrifying attack.
Of course, Zodiac leaves his calling card, the symbol, on Brian's car.
But here's what's always seemed strange to me. This was the last confirmed Zodiac killing.
Right. After this, the violence stops.
But the communication doesn't.
The letters continue, full of taunts and rambling and those cryptic ciphers.
It's like he got more satisfaction from the attention than the actual killings.
Why else keep taunting everyone if he wasn't going to keep going with the attacks?
Some experts think maybe he was in prison for something else, which stopped him from continuing his attacks.
That's a good point.
Or maybe he just lost interest in killing or moved away.
It's possible.
There's always a chance, too, that he died or was injured and couldn't carry out any more attacks.
It's almost more unnerving to think he just stopped.
Like, was something else happening in his life that shifted his focus?
Or was this all part of some plan we just haven't figured out yet?
And those are the kinds of questions that have kept investigators and, armchair detectives and just the public obsessed with this case for years.
It's true.
The lack of closure, the unanswered questions, the possibility that he could still be out there. It all adds to the mystery.
And despite so many leads and suspects and all the advances in DNA technology, we still don't know who he was.
It's true. Years of investigation, countless hours put into the case, and the Zodiac's real identity remains a mystery.
We have fingerprints, DNA from crime scenes, but nothing that's ever been a definite match.
Right.
I bet it's incredibly frustrating for the victims' families and everyone who's devoted their lives to solving this.
Oh, absolutely. You want answers, you want justice, you want to be able to put a face to this evil.
But maybe, just maybe, not knowing is part of what keeps us so hooked.
We want that closure. We want to make sense of the senseless, but the puzzle's missing so many pieces that we can't help but keep coming back to it, trying to make those pieces fit, in our own minds at least.
That's such an interesting point.
It's like the mystery itself has become more important than actually solving it.
Like, we have to grapple with this idea of pure evil to try and figure out how someone could do these things, but because we don't have all the answers, we're left with this unsettling fascination.
Right.
And I think that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive.
Let's take a closer look at some of the most well-known suspects.
The ones who have really captured the imagination and left investigators puzzled.
The ones who have fueled all those late-night true crime discussions.
Okay, everyone, buckle up, because we're about to go down the rabbit hole of Zodiac suspects.
Who are these figures? And what makes their story so compelling? Let's find out.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've kind of set the stage, explored those early attacks, and dug into the Zodiac's need for attention.
Right, but now the million-dollar question.
Who is behind it all?
Who was the Zodiac killer?
And even though this case is officially unsolved, it's not for lack of trying.
I can only imagine.
Going through all those theories and possible leads, it can feel like you're going down a rabbit hole.
For sure. But that's part of what makes these deep dives so interesting, right?
Exactly. We get to be like armchair detectives, look at the evidence, try to piece it all together.
So where do we even start? Are there any suspects that really stand out, like maybe because of strong evidence or because people are just drawn to their stories?
There are a few that we should definitely take a closer look at. Okay, good. One of the most famous and probably the most debated is Arthur Lee Allen.
Oh, yeah, Arthur Lee Allen. His name comes up a lot with the Zodiac. What makes him such a strong suspect?
Well, there's a lot to unpack with Allen.
Unpack away.
He was interviewed by police a bunch of times. He stayed a person of interest for decades, and there was quite a bit of circumstantial evidence that seemed to point right to him.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of evidence are we talking about?
Well, remember that attack at Lake Berryessa?
Of course.
A witness said the attacker was wearing a very specific wristwatch, one with the Zodiac symbol on it.
Oh, wow. That's creepy enough in itself.
Right, and guess what? Allen owned an almost identical watch.
Get out. That's pretty suspicious. What else?
He also lived in Vallejo when the murders happened. He went to some of the same spots where the attacks took place. And you guessed it, he was really into ciphers.
Wow. So not only could he have been in the right places at the right times, but he had the knowledge, maybe even the motive, to create those cryptic messages.
Exactly.
And on top of that,
there were reports from people who knew Allen saying he'd made disturbing comments about wanting to kill people and even taking on a Zodiac persona.
okay, so it sounds like investigators had a lot to work with. Was there any direct evidence linking him, like DNA or something?
That's the frustrating thing.
What?
They had fingerprints, DNA from some of the crime scenes, but they never got a definite match to Allen.
Really?
Yeah, so despite years of investigation, they couldn't find that smoking gun to officially charge him.
He remained this kind of mysterious figure, always under suspicion, always there in the background, but never officially tied to the crimes.
That's right, and I think that's what's fueled so much debate around him.
You think so?
The fact that there's no definitive answer makes him even more fascinating to people.
It's like the mystery itself keeps people interested.
Exactly, and the debate about whether Allen was guilty or not goes on today.
I can see why.
Some investigators are sure he was the Zodiac. Others say the lack of solid evidence proves he wasn't.
It's got to be so frustrating to get so close but not have a clear answer.
Absolutely.
You know what they say? If it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Right, and that seems to be a common theme with Zodiac suspects,
Really?
There are a few others who, like Allen, have these interesting connections, but Never quite enough to definitively prove they did it.
Okay, so spill the tea. Who else should we be looking at? Who else has caught the attention of investigators and fueled all those late-night true crime discussions?
Well, another suspect who got a lot of attention is Richard Gaikowski.
Okay, Richard Gatkowski. And who was he?
He was a journalist.
A journalist. Interesting.
Yeah, he worked for a small paper called Good Times.
Okay, what made people suspicious of him?
Well, for one thing, Good Times often printed articles that were really critical of the police, particularly how they handled the Zodiac case.
Ah, so we got a potential motive right there.
Yeah.
Maybe revenge against law enforcement.
Right. And there were other interesting connections.
Like what?
Several witnesses said Gaikowski looked like the police sketches of the Zodiac. Plus, his handwriting was kind of similar to the Zodiac's.
Wait a minute, he was a journalist, so his work was out there for everyone to see. Couldn't they have just compared his handwriting to the Zodiac's letters and figured it out?
You'd think, right?
Yeah.
And handwriting analysis was a part of the investigation, but the Zodiac was smart.
What do you mean?
He often used block letters and purposely tried to disguise his handwriting.
Oh, to make it harder to match.
Exactly. It was really hard to get a definite match.
So he was always thinking one step ahead, trying to throw off the investigation.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this case so fascinating and frustrating for the people trying to solve it.
I bet. So with Gaikowski, were there any other leads besides the handwriting and what witnesses said? Anything more solid?
There were some interesting theories, but again, nothing that definitely proved he was guilty.
Like what?
Some investigators think that there might be coded messages hidden in Gaikowski's published writings.
Whoa, hold on. Hidden messages in his articles. That's taking the cipher obsession to a whole new level.
It really is.
It shows how obsessed both the Zodiac and the people trying to catch him were with these codes and puzzles.
It's like this deadly game of cat and mouse,
Yeah.
played out in newspapers and crime scenes.
It's insane, but even with these possible hidden messages, it sounds like Gaikowski is another one of those almost suspects, never quite reaching that level of undeniable proof.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And like Alan, he died without ever being officially linked to the Zodiac crimes.
It seems like every time we get close, the trail just disappears.
So we've got two seemingly strong suspects, both dead, with intriguing but not conclusive evidence. Are there any other names on the list? Anyone else who might be a good fit?
There are, and each one brings their own set of questions and possibilities.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
For example, there's a man named Ross Sullivan who worked at the same library as one of the Zodiac's victims, Darlene Farron.
Okay, so a possible connection to a victim. What else makes him a suspect? Was there something specific about him that raised red flags?
Well, Sullivan fit the description of the Zodiac that some witnesses gave, and he had a history of mental health issues, which some people thought could have been a factor.
I see.
And this is interesting. He was really into codes and ciphers, just like the Zodiac.
Oh, wow. So another potential link to those cryptic messages. Was there anything to back that up, or was it just speculation?
There were claims that he actually confessed to the crimes to a friend, although that was never confirmed. But just like with Alan and Gaikowski, there just wasn't that solid evidence linking him to the crimes.
It feels like we keep hitting that so close but not quite there wall with every suspect. You get those little bits of hope, those intriguing details, but then the trail just fades away.
It's a pretty common feeling when you're looking into cases like this, you know?
I can see that.
And it's important to remember that with a case this famous and sensational, there's always the risk of getting tunnel vision.
What do you mean?
Like investigators focusing so much on one suspect that they miss other clues or even misinterpret evidence to fit their own theories.
It's easy to get caught up in a narrative and only see what you want to see.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the best investigators are human, and humans make mistakes. We all have our biases.
So how do we make sense of all this without getting lost in the details? Is there a way to step back, see the big picture?
There is, and that's what we'll do in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, good.
We're going to shift focus from the who to the why. We'll look at some of the bigger theories about the Zodiac's motives, his potential psychological profile, and what his lasting impact tells us about our own interest in true crime.
Okay, you've got me hooked. This is where it gets really interesting.
But for now, we'll have to leave our listeners hanging just a little bit longer.
Ooh, the suspense.
Don't worry. We'll be right back with the final chapter of our Zodiac deep dive, and trust me, it's a thought-provoking one.
Stay tuned. Okay, we're back for the last part of our Zodiac deep dive, and we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have those chilling crimes, all those cryptic ciphers, and we even went down the rabbit hole of possible suspects.
Oh, right. And it's interesting, each suspect, From Arthur Lee Allen to Richard Gaikowski, even Ross Sullivan, they all have these intriguing details and possible connections, but nothing that definitively links them to the crimes.
Nope, none that really cracked the case wide open.
So if we can't say for sure WHO it was, can we at least try to figure out WHY? What was the Zodiac's motivation? And what can we learn from his case, from how it's captured our attention for so long?
Such good questions, and a perfect way to wrap up our deep dive.
I agree.
Even if we never know for sure who the Zodiac was, there's still so much we can learn by looking at the case from different perspectives.
I like that. What kind of perspectives are we talking about?
Well, one is criminal psychology. By looking at the Zodiac's actions, how he communicated, even who he chose as victims, we can start to paint a picture of his possible motives and personality traits.
So what kind of picture emerges when you look at the Zodiac through that psychological lens? What made him tick?
Well, what's interesting is that he doesn't really fit into any one typical criminal category. He has traits of a thrill seeker, someone who gets a kick out of the act of killing itself.
Right.
But then you add on this deep need for attention, for recognition.
And that's so obvious in everything he did. The letters to the newspapers, the ciphers, that symbol. It's like he wanted to be infamous, a household name.
Yeah, and that suggests someone who's very narcissistic, someone who needs to be seen as powerful, superior, in control.
Like he's overcompensating for something.
Exactly, maybe for some feeling of inadequacy or lack of control in his everyday life.
And then there's the whole puzzle aspect of the case, the ciphers, those coded messages, always trying to outsmart the authorities. It's like he was waging this intellectual battle alongside the actual crimes.
It really makes you wonder if creating those ciphers and taunting the police gave him as much satisfaction as the killings themselves.
That's disturbing.
It suggests someone highly intelligent, maybe with a background in cryptography or something like that.
Someone who loves a challenge, loves to feel like the smartest person in the room, even if it's all part of this twisted game with law enforcement.
Yeah. It's pretty chilling when you think about it that way.
It is, to think that he might have been driven not just by anger or bloodlust, but by this warped sense of amusement.
Like it was all a game to him.
To prove he was smarter than everyone else.
Exactly.
Talking about this, it makes me think about why we're so drawn to true crime stories, especially ones like this that haven't been solved.
It's a great question, one that's fascinated experts for years.
What is it about these stories, even with all the darkness and violence, that keeps us coming back for more?
Yeah, why are we so captivated?
I mean, part of it's got to be the mystery, right? Unsolved cases, especially ones as intriguing as the Zodiac, they really tap into our curiosity, our need to make sense of things we don't understand.
We can't resist trying to fill in the gaps, come up with our own theories and explanations, like a puzzle with missing pieces.
And then there's that fear factor, True crime stories, especially those about serial killers, they often play on our deepest fears about safety, about being vulnerable.
Right. It reminds us that even in normal everyday life, bad things can happen.
But I also think there's something cathartic about it.
What do you mean?
These stories let us explore the dark side of human nature from a safe distance.
Oh, I see.
It's like a way to confront our fears about evil without actually being in danger.
It's like a controlled dose of darkness.
Right, a way to process those feelings without experiencing them firsthand.
I like that.
True crime can be like a mirror, reflecting our anxieties and this fascination we have with good versus evil.
And the fact that the Zodiac case is still unsolved only makes that fascination stronger, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. It keeps the door open for speculation, for all those what-ifs.
It's like the story never ends.
It's still evolving in our minds, even though the crimes happened decades ago. We keep asking, who was he? Where did he go? What if he's still out there?
It's both terrifying and endlessly fascinating.
A puzzle we may never solve, but can't stop trying to figure out.
I agree.
And maybe that's the biggest thing the Zodiac case has left us with. It reminds us that even when things are dark and uncertain, we still want to understand. We look for answers.
We try to make sense of things that don't make sense.
Exactly. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It really has.
We've explored the darkest parts of humanity, learned about codes and ciphers, and looked into the mind of one of America's most infamous criminals.
And even though we might never know for sure who the Zodiac killer was, I think we've come away with a much better understanding of the case itself, how complex it is, and how it's affected our culture.
Yeah, we've looked at those chilling details, thought about all those unanswered questions, and considered what this mystery tells us about ourselves, about why we're so drawn to the unknown.
And it's amazing how, even after all these years, Cases like this can still make us think, force us to ask tough questions, and make us confront the darkness that's out there in the world.
And even though the search for the Zodiac might go on, I think the most important thing for all of us is to stay curious, to question what we think we know, and never stop learning, even when faced with a mystery.
Well said. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of the Zodiac Killer.
And remember, if this has got you thinking and wanting to know more, there's so much out there.
Books, documentaries, articles, even forums online, all dedicated to trying to crack the code.
So keep exploring, keep those minds sharp, and who knows, maybe you'll be the one to finally solve the mystery of the Zodiac.
Maybe you'll be the one to put all the pieces together.
Until next time, stay curious.